Oh my God, you guys, this hilt. What's going on, everyone? Tim from Tierphone Orbital. So this is going to be a nice detailed demo walkthrough video on a full custom one-off hilt install. This is a hilt from Nevin over at CCsabers, and I'm going to try my best not to fanboy over space junk. I've done that enough in my previous videos, but this hilt, I mean, every time I get one of Nevin's hilts in hand to do an install on, I'm absolutely blown away by the amount of like detail and work that goes into these hilts. It's not often, I mean, coming from like doing my own one-offs with the limited tools that I have here, I can really appreciate the amount of thought and work that goes into some of these hilts. You know, I don't have a lathe here, but I'm pretty sure Nevin's got all of the adequate machinery and lathes and drill presses and such to where he can actually really let his creative inspiration go, and it's definitely noticeable on all of his hilts. So there's a lot of stuff in this hilt that I recognize, which I appreciate, and there's just some other stuff that's totally custom, one-off parts and I really love that. So we'll talk about the chassis. This is a custom chassis as well, and I'll talk about some of the electronics install that I did on the hilt itself, and then we'll do a demo and we'll be on our way, right? So let's talk about the chassis first. We're going to come into Fusion. This is the chassis that I did for this install. It is a static chassis, so I did my usual greebly work on this guy all over the outside. What I've been trying to do is, especially with some of the one-off hilts that I get when I do chassis work, I try to keep the design and the greebly work in line with the motif of the hilt itself. So this hilt is an apocalypse. Nevin is calling it a post-apocalyptic scrap. So I tried to make it look a little more industrial on the chassis. So regular greebly work. I did put some channels on the chassis itself, and I'll talk about this when we get up close on the chassis, but I've been meaning to try out some of the Edison filaments that I've been seeing around. I think Jeremy from the Saber Merchant did a build with these recently, and I've been wanting to try them out. So I put 2 channels on each side of the chassis to hold those Edison filaments, and this is where those go. I've got holes for wire management so I can make my connection to the board up in here. Proffieboard sits here. We've got a kill switch around back, battery tray, room for a 28mm speaker, and this, again, this is a static chassis, so I've got my wires that come out the top here, and it is held in place with a set screw, right? So nice and easy. Let's come down to the hilt itself. So here it is. Here it is. So Nevin is calling this the post-apocalyptic scrap. Listen, this looks like it came straight out of Mad Max, honestly. This thing is so rad looking. I cannot appreciate enough the amount of work that goes into these hilts. I mean, they're just, in my opinion, they are functional sculptures. They're works of art. I love these hilts, right? So we'll start at the bottom and make our way up. You know, again, I don't recognize any of these parts. I mean, these are what I imagine are probably pommels from, you know, different hilts that we've seen, or, you know, these are parts that Nevin sources and just makes custom. So we've got a D-ring, knurled grip, really hefty grip. Nevin did ship these with 2 brass momentary switches. I believe these are from Calaminian Customs. They look super familiar. Main in and aux. We do have an exposed crystal chamber. Now, I do recognize some of these parts, right? So on the top of this crystal chamber, this is actually from a Fallen Order hilt, probably 89 Sabers Fallen Order, because I believe that part is threaded and unscrews. But Nevin resourced it, you know, for this crystal chamber, and it looks rad. I don't know what this is from. Again, like, this is all just custom stuff, all threaded. You know, it's not just glued in place. Really, really elegant stuff. We've got a brass post here. Like, I mean, just rad. I really, really appreciate this kind of work. I actually do recognize this. I do use these as well for some of my builds. This is actually a heatsink from a 3D printer. So I get these from they're out of Germany, I think. But I use these for my scrap, like I said. But again, like, this is the kind of detail that I'm talking about. Let me just get, I have one here. So this is the kind of like detail that I'm talking about that goes into a lot of these builds. This is that part that I mentioned. It is the same. I think Nevin probably cut it, or maybe he got a shorter one. But you can't just mount this to a hilt because it's squared off, right? So if you want it to sit flush on a hilt, you've got to do like a bevel in it so it sits flush. And I mean, Nevin obviously did that. I've got to do it for my scraps too. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, these are not just parts that are glued onto a hilt. I mean, you've got to really put a lot of work into all of this detail. So I really, really love and appreciate that. Around back, how can you miss this? This is an actual baffling or a heat sink from a machine gun. I mean, this is from an actual rifle that Nevin threaded with some hex screws, and it's secured in place. Heat stained it, obviously. We've got another heat sink up here. I'm not familiar with where this is from. I don't know where the rest of these parts are from, and that's what makes these hilts so rad. Okay, everything heat stained, obviously, and that's it. We've got a knurled thumb screw up top, but beautiful, beautiful hilt. So let's talk about the chassis. So to get at your chassis, you want to unscrew the grip. Okay, and here is the chassis that I did for this build. Now, I did do a pass of what I do a lot of the time with my resin prints is I will, you know, once they're done curing, and you know, I do a wash and cure, and then I will go over them with a coat of Tamiya matte black spray. And then with this particular chassis, I did do a rub and buff. I did a custom color. I did like a dirty gold with some pewter, and did a pass of buff and rub just to bring out some of the details in those greeblies. Here is that Edison filament. We've got two along each side, so I've got a yellow and a blue. Proffieboard sits in here. The Proffieboard is, there is a channel in there that the Proffieboard kind of is secured into, and it kind of hugs the Proffieboard in place. If you need to get at your board, you can certainly use a 90-degree USB connector, or you can push this Proffieboard forward and the whole board comes out. You can work on it that way if you need to. Here is the battery tray, and that's it, right? So let's talk about how to use it. Spring side is your negative. You want to take the flat part of your battery, place it into the chassis. I try to cradle the chassis when I put my batteries in, okay? And then you hit your kill switch.
You hear a lot of common scoring here. Looks like you've boys seen a lot of action.
Oh, God. So let's come down to the bottom here. All right, so all joking aside, what I forgot to mention is these Edison bulbs are bright. These Edison tubes are, I mean, they're brighter than any NeoPixel I've ever used. So what I'm trying to do before I get this off to you, the client, I'm going to write in the config so that you have an ability to resist LEDs from the board. You don't necessarily have to put a physical resistor on these. I did not resist them. They're wired direct to an LED pad. But again, they're so bright. Like it's hard to look directly at them because they are so bright. Super cool accent.
I am no Jedi.
But they're really bright. So yeah. So I'm gonna dim those a little bit before. Good Lord, they're so bright. It's like washing out the camera. So I'm going to dim those a little bit before I get that out to you. So let's talk about how to use the hilt. Once you put your battery in, hit your kill switch. You want to screw the grip on. And then you are ready to go. Okay. So there's that crystal chamber. I do also have So failed to mention the other accent pixels. So I've got one single neopixel that sits underneath this crystal. That is its own blade. And I also, behind this heatsink or this grill here, there's another neopixel, and that is another blade. So there are 4 blades in this config. One is for those Edison filaments, one is for the crystal chamber, one is for that grill, and the other is obviously for the blade, okay? And that's all written into the config. So let's talk about how to use the hilt, okay? So there are 2 buttons along the side of the middle part of the hilt, okay? So to turn the blade on, you want to tap your main, okay? Aux will activate your clashes, and then just tap main again to turn it off. Okay, if you want to play a soundtrack, you want to long press your main and release. To turn that off, you long press again and release. To scroll through your fonts, you want to hit the aux. Now, when the blade is pointing up, when the hilt is pointing up, and you tap aux, it will go forward in your font configs. To go backwards, you just point it down and it will go to the next one.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
So every config's got a different color scheme on the crystal and that grill, and obviously the blade is different on each config, but you can change the color of the blade as well on the fly if you would like.
I'm Cal Kestis.
So let's put a blade in it. So to put a blade in, you want to make sure your thumb screw is unscrewed. Kind of sit your blade down onto those brass pins in the PCB. Don't really jam it down in there, just kind of let it rest on them, and then tighten your thumb screw. And you're ready to go, right? So if you want to change the color on your blade while it is on, you want to long press of your aux button and tap the main. You'll get an audible cue, and then as you rotate the hilt, it will change color. You probably can't tell on camera here, but as you rotate, it'll change color. When you see a color you like, tap the button again and you're good.
Kylo Ren.
All your clashes work. If you want to lock up, you tap the aux while you are clashing. And that's it. Nice, simple rundown. Nice, simple rundown on how to use the hilt. I know that was a crash course on Proffieboard. The client did mention to me that this is their first Proffie, so I know that was a very, very quick rundown. As always, if you have any questions, I'm always available and able to help. But that's it, right? So I cannot speak highly enough of Nevin's work, right? So I've had the pleasure of working with Nevin a few times, a lot. I think it's a dozen. Who's counting, right? I've had a working relationship with Nevin for quite some time now, and it's gotten to a point where we've got a friendship. Absolute professional. The guy's hilts are top-notch quality. So, I'm a huge fanboy of these hilts, man. Like I love them. I actually picked one up on the Facebook Marketplace. This is going to be a gift for somebody. I don't have a personal scrap or space junk sabers yet, but maybe someday. So anyway, listen, everybody, thank you very much for watching. To the client, thank you very much for trusting me with this install. If anyone has any questions or critiques or comments, please, leave them below or reach out to me. I'm always available. And with that being said, thanks for watching, everybody. May the force be with you always.